You know that person who will defend their iPhone like it's a family member? The one who owns the MacBook, the AirPods, the iPad, the Apple Watch, and is genuinely excited about a new charging cable? Yeah, everyone calls them a sheep, but according to neuroscience, their brain might actually be processing brand loyalty in a fundamentally different way than yours. And what I'm about to tell you will completely change how you see the Apple fanatics in your life. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Loving Apple products doesn't make you a mindless consumer. It doesn't mean you're bad with money. And it definitely doesn't mean you're part of some cult. But there is something genuinely fascinating happening in your brain that's completely different from the people who just see phones as tools. Let's start with the obvious question. Why do people care so much about a tech company? Why does someone feel personally attacked when you criticize their iPhone? Humans don't just buy products, they buy identity. For thousands of years, the things you owned signaled who you were in the tribe. Your tools, your clothing, your possessions, they all communicated status and belonging. And Apple figured this out better than almost any company in history. When someone uses an Apple product, their brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the same chemical that makes you love your family. Wild, right? Their brain literally tricks them into thinking this billion-dollar corporation is part of their identity. But here's where it gets interesting. People who love Apple often have what psychologists call high brand consciousness. Their self-concept is more strongly tied to the products they use. They're more likely to say, "The things I choose reflect who I am." And there's actual research on this. A 2015 study using fMRI scans found that Apple fans' brains showed activation in areas associated with religion when shown Apple imagery. Not Samsung, not Google. Apple. The same neural pathways that light up when devoted Christians see religious symbols. The same areas associated with identity, belonging, and meaning. Think about that for a second. But wait, it gets weirder, because what happens in the brain of an Apple user when they unbox a new product is legitimately fascinating. You know that feeling when you peel the protective film off a new screen? That satisfaction? That's dopamine firing in your brain. Apple has weaponized unboxing. The weight of the box, the way it opens, the smell of new electronics, the perfectly arranged components. Every detail is engineered to create a dopamine hit. Studies show that the anticipation of using a new Apple product activates the same reward centers as anticipating a vacation or a first date. It's not just about the phone. It's about the experience, the ritual, the moment. And Apple knows this. They've turned purchasing technology into an event. Other companies sell you a phone in a plastic clamshell. Apple sells you a ceremony. Here's the kicker. The consistency is what makes it so powerful. Every iPhone unboxing feels familiar but fresh. That predictability, with slight variation, is intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive reward schedule known to psychology. The same principle that makes slot machines so effective. Your brain knows what to expect but is still surprised by the newness. It's brilliant and kind of terrifying. People who don't love Apple, their dopamine systems simply aren't triggered by brand consistency and design language. And this might be neurological. Research suggests that variations in dopamine receptor genes can predict how much someone values aesthetic cohesion and brand ecosystems. Your complete indifference to whether someone uses an iPhone or Android might literally be in your DNA. But there's another layer. Apple users experience something psychologists call emotional contagion through brand communities. When Apple announces a new product, millions of people get excited together. They watch the keynote. They discuss rumors. They feel part of something bigger. When Android announces a new phone, it barely registers outside tech circles. Apple has created shared emotional experiences at scale. People who love Apple are more likely to engage in this collective anticipation. They don't need the validation of owning the product. They get dopamine from being part of the conversation, from knowing the ecosystem, from understanding the references. Their self-esteem is partially built on being in the know. Now, before the comment section explodes, I'm not saying Apple users are better or worse than anyone else, but I am saying there are legitimate psychological differences, and understanding them is fascinating. Here's something that sounds contradictory. Apple haters often say Apple users don't care about specs, and they're kind of right, but not for the reason they think. It's not that Apple users are ignorant, it's that their brains prioritize different information. A 2018 study found that people with high brand loyalty showed reduced activity in areas of the brain associated with critical evaluation when viewing their preferred brand. Translation: When an Apple user looks at a new iPhone, the part of their brain that normally asks, "Is this actually worth it?" goes quiet. Not because they're stupid, because their brain has already decided this brand is trustworthy. It's cognitive efficiency, not cognitive laziness. They've outsourced the decision-making to brand trust. Think about it. Every day you make thousands of decisions. Should I trust this website? Is this food safe? Is this person lying? Your brain creates shortcuts to save energy. For Apple users, Apple makes it, therefore it's good, is one of those shortcuts. And it works for them. They're not constantly second-guessing. They're not paralyzed by choice. They pick the Apple option and move on. People who don't love Apple, they're optimizing for different things: customization, value, specs, freedom. Neither approach is wrong. They're just different strategies for navigating an overwhelming marketplace. But let's talk about the ecosystem, because this is where Apple's psychological engineering reaches its final form. Once you have an iPhone, getting AirPods makes sense. Then your messages sync, so you get a MacBook. Then your photos sync, so you get an iPad. Then you need a watch to complete the cycle. Before you know it, you're in so deep that switching feels impossible. Some people call this lock-in, and technically, it is. But here's what critics miss. For people who love Apple, this isn't a trap. It's relief. It's the end of decision fatigue. It's knowing that everything will work together seamlessly. Their brain interprets ecosystem integration not as restriction, but as freedom from friction. And there's science behind this. Research on choice overload shows that too many options actually makes people less happy. When everything is customizable, you're constantly wondering if you made the right choice. Apple users have opted out of that anxiety. They've chosen the walled garden, and their cortisol levels thank them for it. Here's the part that explains why Apple users and Apple haters can't understand each other. It comes down to what you value in technology. Apple haters value control, flexibility, getting exactly what they want. Apple lovers value simplicity, reliability, not having to think about it. One group sees a closed ecosystem as a prison. The other sees it as a sanctuary. Neither is wrong. They're just two different approaches to the human relationship with technology. One group wants to tinker, customize, optimize. The other wants it to just work so they can focus on literally anything else. And let's be honest about something else. For some people, loving Apple is about status, the glowing logo, the blue text messages, the AirPods that everyone recognizes. It's social signaling, and that's not inherently bad. Humans have been signaling status through possession since we lived in caves. But for many Apple users, it goes deeper. It's about aligning with values. Apple markets themselves as innovative, creative, rebellious. Think different wasn't just a slogan, it was an identity invitation. When you buy Apple, you're not just buying a phone. You're buying membership in a tribe of people who see themselves as creative, forward-thinking, design-conscious. A 2020 study found that people who identify as creative were 73% more likely to prefer Apple products, even when controlling for income and tech knowledge. It's not about the specs. It's about what the brand represents. And for people whose identity centers on creativity or aesthetics, Apple speaks their language. People who don't care about Apple often direct that identity expression elsewhere: their car, their clothes, their hobbies. Everyone signals identity somehow. Apple users just happen to do it through their technology. Here's what researchers call the endowment effect. Once you own something, your brain values it more highly than identical items you don't own. Apple users don't just own iPhones. They've invested time learning iOS, money buying apps, emotional energy defending their choice. Their brain has literally increased the perceived value of their Apple products to justify that investment. And here's what's really interesting. People who love Apple often report feeling less stressed about technology. They're not spending hours researching which phone has the best camera. They're not troubleshooting driver issues. They're not customizing settings for weeks. They paid a premium for simplicity, and their mental bandwidth thanks them. There's something quietly radical about that. In a world that constantly demands optimization and perfect choices, Apple users have said, good enough is enough. They've traded absolute control for peace of mind, and their nervous systems are probably calmer for it. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people hate Apple specifically because other people love Apple. It's reactance theory. When you see someone enthusiastically loyal to something, especially something expensive, there's a psychological urge to reject it. It feels like conformity, like being manipulated, so you dig in against it. But people who genuinely love Apple aren't thinking about you. They're not trying to prove anything. They found a thing that works for their brain, and they stuck with it. Your opposition to Apple might say more about your relationship with conformity and autonomy than about the products themselves. So what does all this mean? If you love Apple, you're not a sheep. You're not wasting money. You're not in a cult. Your brain's reward system, your decision-making shortcuts, your values around design and simplicity, they're all calibrated differently than people who don't get it. And that's perfectly okay. The next time someone calls you an Apple fanboy and laughs at your excitement over a new MacBook, remember this. You're not being irrational. Your brain is just optimizing for different things. Cohesion over customization, simplicity over specs, experience over value, and that might, just maybe, be exactly what your life needs. If this resonated with you, you're probably going to love understanding why some people can't stop customizing everything they own, and why that might actually be exhausting their brain in ways they don't realize. But that's a different video. For now, keep loving what you love. Your brain knows what it's doing.